We're here today to talk about a couple of archaeological preserves that the Conservancy created in the 1990s in the Verde Valley in Arizona. The Verde Valley is a very interesting geologic feature that's located between Phoenix and Flagstaff. And I'm sure that many of you have been there. Some of you may have seen some of the amazing archaeological sites that are there, including Montezuma Castle, Montezuma Well, and Tuzigut. All three of those sites are Tuzigut phase Southern Sinawa ruins. They're masonry, and they were created by a group of people that probably migrated down from the Flagstaff area in the mid-1100s. So there are a number of amazing sites in this area. Usually they're located along waterways. These people were farmers. Their houses and villages were usually located high above the creeks that flow through the valley. We know that they probably were utilizing irrigation agriculture by diverting water out of the creeks into their crops down below their villages. We believe that the people who lived in the Verde Valley and constructed and occupied these amazing archaeological sites were probably ancestral to the Hopi. And the Hopi also, through their oral histories, trace their origins back to the Verde Valley.
Hi, my name is Ken Zoll. I'm the Executive Director of the Verde Valley Archaeology Center here in Camp Verde. We are one of the founding organizations within this area that created a repository, and we also are dedicated to site preservation and to tell the stories of the people who lived here, the Hopi, the Yavapai, the Apache, and tell their stories their way as they want them told.
The inhabitants of this site are known as the Southern Sinawa. That's a name given to them by Harold Colton, the founder of the Museum of Northern Arizona. When he was studying the people up in Flagstaff area, he named them Sinawa, which is a Spanish word for without water. And that's how the Spaniards, when they arrived here in 1583, identified these people. When he came down to the Verde Valley, he saw some similarities in architecture and burial methods, and so he assumed that this was a southern branch and therefore named them the Southern Sinawa. Thus began the debate from the very beginning as to what these people were, where they came from. One thing we do know for certain is this is an ancestral group of the Hopi. The Hopi claim this site along with many others here. They are not terribly excited about the use of the word Sinawa to refer to their ancestors because it's a Spanish word. They would prefer to the use of the term Hisatsinom, which is a Hopi word meaning the ancient ones.
I'm Monica Buckle. I'm the Deputy Director and Curator of Fine Arts here at the Verde Valley Archaeology Center and Museum. I'm also an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma through my mother's side. I bring with me a Native sensitivity to work with Indigenous artifacts, objects, as well as art. It's an honor to be here on the territories of the Hisatsinom. The Hisatsinom are the ancestors of the Hopi. The Hopi reside up at the Mesas in northern Arizona. This territory is also Yavapai and Apache territory. We're just a few miles down the road from the Yavapai Apache Nation. So it's always wonderful to come with an Indigenous perspective to honor those who reside here on this land. Right now, we're in the Hisatsinom Gallery. The Hisatsinom means ancient ones in Hopi. The Hopi are the descendants of the Sinagua. Sinagua was a Spanish word given, and the Hopi prefer Hisatsinom. We also love to exhibit contemporary art here at the museum. This mural was commissioned and painted by filmer Koyoema. He's an elder and a Hopi artist. This depicts the Hopi migration from the Verde Valley to the Hopi Mesas. This is the fourth world. Filmer's mural tells the story of the Hopi emergence from the underworld to this world, and when they received this world, they were greeted by Masao. Masao is the Hopi guardian and caretaker of the people. The imagery we see here are depicting different clan symbols. We have butterfly clan, squash clan. We have spider clan over here. Masao, from my understanding, gave the Hopi the guidelines and instructions on how to live a peaceful life and also for survival. Masao told the Hopi to go into different directions here on Turtle Island. Turtle Island is what we Native people refer to as North America.
A site that was pretty amazing was brought to our attention in the spring of 1990. And an Arizona landowner began the first steps to build his dream home on top of a hill. That hill was located about 200 feet above Oak Creek, and the hill was known as Sugarloaf Mountain. In his preparations to build a house, the landowner decided to lease the archaeological site to a looter. And the looter began using a backhoe to cut a zigzag driveway up the side of Sugarloaf Mountain. Now, all of this was legal given the preservation laws that were in Arizona at the time. And the community reacted badly to the destruction of this unique resource. So the people in Cornville really decided to rise up and do whatever they could to stop this destruction. The town began a series of candlelight walks involving dozens of concerned citizens marching at dusk to Sugarloaf Mountain from the Cornville Mercantile Store to call attention to the destruction. Someone poured sugar into the fuel tank of the backhoe and completely disabled the machine. The Hopi tribe expressed extreme concern about the potential attack on their patrimony. Headlines in the Phoenix newspapers alerted all of Arizona to the developers' actions. The Arizona State Legislature began deliberation on a burial protection bill, and the Archaeological Conservancy began negotiations with the landowner to buy the property. It took a year of hard work and negotiations, but the outcome of this tragic scenario did have a happy ending. Celebrated, of course, in the parking lot of the Cornville Mercantile. The Archaeological Conservancy closed on the preserve in early 1992 with the help of an Arizona Heritage Fund matching grant.
We are now at what's referred to as the Atkinson Pueblo, originally called the Sugarloaf Pueblo. This is a Tuzigood phase site, occupied from around 1300 to about 1425 by the Southern Sanawa. This one is on Oak Creek. This is actually what's referred to as the Sugarloaf Group. There were about 15 pueblos that are up and down the Verde River and Oak Creek, and all occupied at about the same time. So archaeologists have called them all part of the Sugarloaf Group because the Sugarloaf ruin here is basically in the center of this grouping of dwellings. One of the interesting archaeological features, as well as architectural features of this particular site, is when you're up there, what you find is that they are basically a square block of rooms with a very large plaza in the center. Dr. Charles Adams, who's been studying homology and the Katsina religion for many years, has indicated that the construction of plazas indicates the arrival of the Katsina religion into an area. We have 3 ruins here in the Verde Valley that were single construction. Unlike a lot of pueblos where they'll build a couple of rooms and then as the family grows they add a couple more rooms, these 3 structures were built in one construction phase. Clearly there was some sort of, if you will, architect who had decided this is where we need to put these dwellings. We need to have the rooms on the outside like you do with a lot of the Pueblo sites today where they do the large dances in the plaza and the people gather around the tops. So this is one of those 3. So it seems to indicate, according to Dr. Charles Adams, that this may be one of the sites that kind of proves that the Katsina religion had actually arrived here.
Hello, my name is Rob Elliott, and I'm one of the site stewards for the Conservancy sites Atkinson Pueblo and Atkinson Pueblo.
One thing that's unique about these are called Hilltop sites, and late in the culture of the Sinawa, they put their major locations on hilltops, and they all string down the Verde Valley, say from 1.5 miles to 2 miles apart, and it's all based on geology. They didn't build the mountains, but they've got all of these hilltop sites, and you guys own like 4 of them, and they're all line of sight, and the thought was that they could signal. And if you look over there, there's a little mound that there's probably a hilltop site on that mound, and then Tuzagut and Huddalakva is that direction, all within sight of each other, and then Oak Creek is this direction that will go, Atkinson's will go next. And then Thene is over in Lake Montezuma. It's another hilltop site, and it was very typical for the major sites to be located on that spacing. It's pretty interesting stuff. Now, do you know the history of Jedito Yellow? It came here late. What they typically call these sites late Tuzagut, and that's, I would say, from 1100, 1150 to 1350. That would have appeared maybe later in that period, 1300, 1350, and it has a yellow cast to it because it was fired with coal. And the local source of coal is the Hopi reservation. And so that came from Hopi. Around here, they typically didn't do much decorated pottery. Most of what you see decorated came from outside of here. And that's special because it's late, fired in coal, it's very, very hard and very consistent, and it took on that color. And that's just a neat little piece because of the detail that they were able to produce with the craftsmen. You start going up this road or this cut, and there's stuff everything, and when it rains, like I say, it all kind of erps up. I'll show you some more stuff further up. Recently we did an obsidian study here, and I'll show you some obsidian. There's a local archaeologist who has the X-ray fluorescence device, and there are 4 or 5 major locations or sources of obsidian. %98 of it comes from a location called Government Mountain west of Flagstaff, and that's what we found here. So that was all import. There's no obsidian because that's all volcanic. The San Francisco Basin or Flagstaff, that's all volcanic. So there's a real good source of that material, but it was all brought down from that location. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago or within the last 10 years, there was a fair amount of stabilization done up here. And these rock walls were built on the road to kind of prevent erosion. And so here's an area where, obviously, if we get a lot of rain, this all gets pretty dicey. And it's slowly just starting to come down and things start popping out. So we watch this area real close. And we can get some pretty significant rains up here. Monsoon type rains. You know, we just leave it all here, but it all starts popping out. And if it's something big, I would talk with Ken, or even back to Jim. What do you want us to do? What's the appropriate course for this? And the Archaeology Center can actually take it in and curate it if we had to. With the new building, you'll see that when you do a tour of that, which is pretty cool. A lot of your sites are, what would you call it, traffic paths for animals. You look out here, there's not much going on. Deer come through these sites all the time. And there's a couple Thaney has on top. It's obviously a bed down spot for probably javelina or deer. But you see them come through, they're part of the wildlife corridor. But this has all been reconstructed to stabilize the road and the walkway up here. But I bet there's stuff right there. That might have been a pit house right there, village, or right down here is probably pit houses. If you really got down in there and started looking around. But those are so perishable that they don't last very long. So now we're getting obviously to the top, and the room blocks start appearing, rockfall. And then I don't know whether this was an entry to the site or not, but it's become one at this point. In all these sites, there's some kind of a plaza. And this would be the plaza for this location. Room blocks are all around it. A lot of people feel it was defensive. And you sure can see, all around you, if that were to be the case. But only so many people could live up here, and to actually support the construction of this, which takes a lot of energy, there seemed to me that there'd always need to be more people. So I think these are kind of ceremonial, but that's just my own feeling, just kind of looking at a lot of different sites. The bigwigs lived up here, the elites, or maybe the ruling families or something. But you need a lot of people to support this much. Well, I think there's obviously some prominence when you build on top, because if this was inhabited by 1,000 people, there's going to be pit houses all down in these flats. This would have all been agricultural probably. So this is kind of the home base. This is kind of downtown. And the plaza, that could have been a market. There's some sites around here that are big walled-in sites that aren't real obvious, but they could easily be a trading point. They're real close to the Verde, and it could have been a market type of scenario. There's a lot of people here during these periods. It just wasn't 50 people around here. There's a lot more. Most of the decorated stuff, like the jetadope pieces, that came from Hopi. And the more common of this culture was that plainware. They didn't, what I'm reading, they're not putting the decorated pottery much with the Sinawa. All the decorated came in from outside. And every so often you find a piece of polychrome, which is like 3-color, and a lot of that came from the south, between here and Phoenix. And then the black and white, a lot of that came from Kayenta and the Four Corners. And not that they didn't practice with that, but it's more typical outside. So there was a lot A lot of trading. The obsidian, it's not natural here, so there's a lot of obsidian on this site, so they brought a lot of that in. And definitely trading because they were on the Verde River. The Verde River, all the way down to Phoenix, was a trading route. Holcomb, Salado, up to here and back and forth. There's a big salt mine, Camp Verde, and salt was huge for all of the tribes. So they came up here for the salt, and that salt got traded all over the Southwest. It was one of the maybe 3 or 4 salt mines that had been discovered that were used as trading materials. So that was their gold. And one thing that you start kind of picking up on is what's natural and what might be imported. Mm-hmm. And you probably, you know what a matate and a mano is. Oftentimes they're basalt. That seemed to be a real good material to use. There's a big piece of basalt, and it is not natural to this area. So we've always thought they brought that in. That might have been a material for a potential tool. You see, most of this is all the limestone. See those 2 little bumps way back look like snow? Those are the San Francisco Peaks. And the San Francisco Peaks represent a third world immersion point for a number of tribes, the Hopi, the Zuni, Acoma, probably the Sinawa. That's the Katsina origin. So you got a view of that from here, which is, you know, like I said, they didn't build this mountain, but you've got a view of the emergent point for a lot of the beliefs of these tribes from this location. So that's also kind of significant. It came with it. Now, as they built these structures, if these structures were up maybe single floor, 1 roof, you know, they entered from the roof, they would have a good view of all that. And who knows what other alignments they might have had with that. A lot of times there's rock walls that just kind of go right towards it. But, you know, we just don't know what all that means. There's no documentation that we understand, and we try to pack it into our 2022 minds, but see that mesa right there? On the very right side of that, there's a big site called Big Cornville Ruin, and it's 70 or 80 rooms. But see, they could see each other across here. And there's a lot of theories of how did they signal? And, you know, a big old bonfire sure is visible for a long way. Well, why would this be a sunwatcher site? You get a real clear view of that rim. See that rim beyond? You've got a very clear view of the sunrise. And there are a number of petroglyphs around the valley that actually depict the horizon and then mark points. And they've learned that the points represent the sunrise at the different solstices. And I am not an expert at it, but up in this location, you've got a clear view, best view of the rim over there, we call it, which is the rim of the Colorado Plateau. And you can then pinpoint where the sunrise real easy and know when to get agricultural. The actual site might be over here, but there's usually a more obvious place that someone sat, because maybe a medicine man or a shaman, and they would be expert on this. They would leave a mark. They would sit in the same spot, and you would notice that. In certain sites you can see that. Polished stone or...
My specialty is prehistoric astronomy. And so all these sites I explore to see whether or not there's calendar making or some sort of other sun watching features involved. There's a very interesting low area off to the north of this site that when you're there and you're sitting on the site, you have beautiful views of both the horizon at sunrise and sunset. The only way I can prove that that was a sun watcher seat is to record those at those specific times at equinox and solstices, and then hike to those surrounding areas to see if there are shrines. We have done that at some other sites and proven the existence of sunwise receipts. That has yet to be done here. So one of the things we keep looking for is find some young people who are getting their degrees in archaeology and maybe entice them to come here and do their master thesis or PhD dissertation on a site like this. Welcome to the Atkinson Pueblo, owned by the Archaeological Conservancy since 1985. The site here is Tuzagut phase, which means basically it was occupied from 1300 to about 1450, has a maximum of 35 rooms, including several that are below this particular site here along the outer edge of the river, where there are several cavates. We are basically at the south end of the Verde Valley. Looking to the west, we have the Black Mountains, and looking to the east, we have the Mogollon Rim. To the north of here is the Tuzagut ruin, as well as the Hatalakava ruin, which is also owned by the Conservancy. And also behind me, a little farther down, is the Sugarloaf.
The Conservancy first started working in this area in the early 1980s, and we started looking at some of the available sites. Most of these sites were on private land. The one site that was really very interesting, it had been mentioned to us by many archaeologists who are familiar with the area, is the Oak Creek ruin. And the Oak Creek ruin was actually our first acquisition in Arizona. And we acquired the ruin around 1982. It is located directly above Oak Creek. It is very close to where Oak Creek flows into the Verde River. And this is in sort of the heart of the Verde Valley itself. One thing that distinguishes the site is its preservation. And amazingly enough, this site that may date as far back as 1300 AD actually has standing wall segments made of masonry that are over 8 feet tall. And it makes it a very dramatic site. The Conservancy really doesn't have anything else to compare to it in our entire collection of southwestern archaeological sites. In addition, there are some interesting features that are under the rim of the overhang that the main pueblo is on. And under that rim, there's a cliff, and the cliff is made up of very friable material. And the material can be actually carved into rooms. And there are a number of rooms that are underneath the main Oak Creek ruin that are called cavates. And these cavates obviously were occupied at some point. Some of them may have been used as storage rooms. And it makes the site really, really interesting. The site itself is about a 35-room pueblo. It was originally reported by Jesse Walter Fuchs, who was a pioneer archaeologist who actually saw the site in the 1800s and mapped it. And so we began our negotiations with the owner, and we were able to come up with something that suited both of us. The owner was very interested in the permanent preservation of this unique site, and we were very anxious to make sure that it was available for our children and grandchildren to see. So that was one of our first sites that we acquired in the Verde Valley.
before I got here, I called Wally. You know, who the hell's Wally? Well, Wally is his wife and mother's family own this property, and that's who you guys acquired the property from. He still lives here, and he watches this site very, very carefully. The deal that we've got with him, and out of courtesy, which is absolutely fine, I call him beforehand and say, hey, Wally, this is Rob, I'm coming over. So he watches the property very, very closely, and he does chase people off. So it's in good hands because he's very, very protective, as most of your sites are. But another late Tuzagoot Hilltop site, same timing as Sugarloaf, 1100, 1050, 1100 to 1300. The site has about 35 rooms. And then there's cavates on the cliff face below, which Friends of Forest and we recorded all those, about 24 rooms we identified that had been occupied. A couple of them had plaster floors, still remnants of plaster floors and grinding slicks and walls and different improvements. A lot of that's gone now. The earlier photos show some more walls. There's one room that's pretty interesting. It's got a hole in the ceiling about this big that goes up to an upper room. So that was actually cut through from a lower cave to an upper cave, and that's very common in this area with the limestone being so soft. It was worked, and instead of building walls, they just inhabited those, which is the way to go. Did an Obsidian Study here, pretty much same result. Government Mountain was most of the material. On all the drawings that you see, especially the Fuchs stuff, they reference this depression, and nobody really knows what it is nowadays. Could it have been kind of a roasting pit? Could this have been a kiva-like thing? Not sure. It might have just been natural. But first time I was brought out here, I was asked, "What do you think it is?" And it's like, don't really know, But it's shown up on surveys from early 1900s, late 1800s. It's not a big hill, but it's the hill, and it's still get a pretty good view of all around. I would expect that all this was the arable land they used and occupied, and you'll see more across Oak Creek, similar to Sugarloaf. Isn't this cool? This has all been stabilized, and the pictures I've seen in the past, I'm not sure this was a T-shaped doorway. This was a replacement framing from a historical installation. This was done in the last 10 years, just kind of representation and just to kind of stabilize the wall, so it had all started to collapse in on itself. So they got that straightened out. And over here, this appears to be some historic stabilization or support. This is dimensional lumber, so it was cut, and then somebody stuck that in there to hold this up. But if you look real close, right here appears to be some structure from along this line, from maybe a roof or a floor level in here. I would expect the natural floor level is probably about 3 feet below what we're standing on. This is just fill. So this could have easily been a 2-story structure. Maybe not, but there's some evidence. Now here's Oak Creek. This was what was flowing by Sugarloaf, and there's the confluence of Oak Creek and the Verde is right down here, and in fact that line of trees, it's really greened up here just in this last week. That's the Verde River, and then Oak Creek flows into that. But this whole face right here has got these cavets all along the front here. I mean, this just shows how widely Oak Creek has swung back and forth over the years. And the room blocks just kind of march along here. And you can see here's some of the old wall and the mortar and how it's all kind of just collapsed over the years. And there's a big wall here. But see these just kind of right along in a sequence here. I mean, look how thick this is. Pretty amazing. Which, could indicate a taller wall for sure. Just taller you go, the thicker they got to be at the bottom. Well, then if you look back, this appears to be, I think this has been placed, but I think this was a beam pocket. If you look back, it's kind of hollowed out. So this might have been, the floor for this area might have been 4 feet down, 4 or 5 feet down, and this was a roof at this point, maybe. And I haven't seen any other pieces of structure along here. But there's a corner back here, but it's real chunky kind of stone to work with. This is such a cool site. It's right much closer to the creek, which is pretty cool.
And now we're just below Atkinson Pueblo, where we're going to visit some cavates near Oak Creek.
These cavates were laboriously carved into the cliffside by indigenous inhabitants hundreds of years ago. The caves show obvious recreational use into historic times, and they are filled with graffiti dating back to the late 19th century. Only a few potsherds, corn cobs, and stone flakes remain. Many of them still contain features such as floor-level grinding features, wall segments made of stone and clay, carved storage areas, and interconnecting rooms. Some areas, like this one, are filled with dozens of ancient corn cobs that were probably stored in pots or baskets that have long disappeared. Red clay mortar still remains tucked away in the nooks and crannies of the stones where wall segments once stood. The cavates continue in groupings across the cliff face. A few stone artifacts line the trail along the way. Visitors to this site have left their mark here for over a century, with many of the inscriptions dating back to the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The cavates often contain doorways that open up to large chambers filled with interior storage features. Some of the inscriptions are etched into the rock, and others appear to have been drawn using a pencil or fire suet. Along with these inscriptions, there is also evidence of campfires, both old and new. The far western cliff face contains the most impressive group of interconnecting cavates along Oak Creek. Early photographs taken by archaeologists like Jesse Walter Fuchs show standing walls on the exteriors of these caves that most likely now have become one with the creek below. This area contains a series of connecting rooms that show evidence of once being divided by wall segments. You can crawl from one room to the next without ever leaving the complex. The large cave entrances facing Oak Creek would have had some mortar as well, although windows and doors may have also been present. There is a second level of cavates here that may have once been accessed by ladders. This level also has interconnecting rooms, interior storage features, and chunky remnants of red clay mortar. Even with the amount of human activity at this site, the preservation here is truly a wonder. From the Hisatsinom to the first pioneering settlers who arrived in the Verde Valley in the late 1800s, these cavates have been a source of human activity for hundreds of years. Although walls have crumbled and artifacts have been looted over the years, Atkinson Pueblo still has stories to tell, and the Conservancy will ensure that this site is protected and that these important stories are told for decades to come.
Well, welcome. We are now at the Verde Valley Archaeology Center and Museum building that contains not only our museum, but also our classroom and our repository, collection center, laboratory, etc. that you'll see. We're very happy to have this building. We've only been in this building, officially opened, only about a month. And almost all the exhibits are finished. We have maybe 2 that are still in process, but the rest of the 8 or 10 exhibits are fully completed. It was a pleasure meeting with you and joining you and showing you the ruins the other day, and I hope you'll enjoy your visit within the building. So the largest collection of artifacts that we have within the Verde Valley Archaeology Center is that from the Dyck Cliff Dwelling. And the Dyck Cliff Dwelling was occupied from around 1050 to about 1250 AD. Unlike Montezuma Castle that some of you might be familiar with, which is a very shallow but large facility, this was very deep, where they were actually able to create 5 masonry separated rooms within it. They were occupied by basically, we think, one family group during that entire time. It was undisturbed for over 700 years. So when Paul Dike, the artist, acquired the property and he found this cliff dwelling, he was amazed. And he put fencing across the front of it, big keep out signs to preserve it. And then he didn't say anything to anybody from the time he bought it in 1935 until he was doing a art show in LA County in 1961. And he mentioned to the archaeologist at the time that he had this cliff dwelling and offered him to come out and take a peek at it. But when he got out, he was basically blown away. And for the next 10 years, he brought PhD graduate students out to do their summer field work in excavating this cave. At the time, they pulled out over 50,000 items. We have their field notes, their drawings, we have their in situ photographs of every artifact that's there. So this first case here that we have of domestic items, we have some sandals, we have some jewelry or adornment items, we have bracelets made out of clamshells, we have different pendants made out of bird bones, beads, cactus spine turned into a ring, we have figurines, we have an anvil that they used, we have some prayer sticks, as well as some funnels that they would have used, as well as agave knives. So basically everyday kind of things that would have shown daily life. In the second case in this room, we have a wide variety of items. So we start with some fire sticks, some hairpins, one is stone, one is slate. We have awls, different types of tools made out of bones, an arrow straightener. The most interesting piece in here, among many, is a woven basket, but within the woven basket are corn cobs. And if you look closely at the corn cobs, there's a hole at the end of it that's sticking out. And then over here, we have some corn cobs with sticks out the end. Now, some have said, well, that's like a corn dog. Well, no, it's not like a corn dog. They were actually a game that they would take the corn cob out, put a pointed stick at one end and feathers at the other end, and try to toss them into rings of corn husks. It was like the lawn darts of prehistoric times. And so our guess is, here we have this very elaborate woven basket with corn cobs in it. Is that like today's professional dart players who carry around their own personal darts for the next competition? Who knows? But it's kind of interesting to kind of think of that they're just the same as any of us today with pride in their particular craft. So we're now in the Diet and Subsistence Gallery, and on the wall behind me is a mural of one of the walls, as I mentioned in the previous area where they caved. It was very deep and they made masonry walls to separate them. This is a close-up of one of those walls, masonry walls. And if you were here and looking closely, you could actually see fingerprints of where they were making the plaster within it. So in one case over here, we have our hunting material, we have bows, we have arrows. And one of the most unique things that we have is we have 70 arrows, but 40 of them are painted. And they're painted under where the feather fletching would be. The other unique thing is none of them are the same. All 40 are different colors, different patterns, and we have no idea why they did that. So we don't know if they're prayers or personal decoration, just an interesting feature of it. We have a rabbit stick in the collection here, and sometimes this is referred to as a one-way boomerang. They would throw it to kill a rabbit. And to show what it's like, we were able to purchase a photograph from the 1920s of a Hopi, and he's got a rabbit stick in one hand and a dead rabbit in the other hand.
The interesting thing here is we were doing an art show a few years back, and one of the women artists came in this room and she started screaming, and I come running in here and she says, "That's my grandfather. I have the original 8.5 by 11 that the Smithsonian took in 1924. So that was a really pretty cool little side bit there. One of the unique things about the people who lived here is this was clearly an agricultural community. These were groups of farmers, prehistoric farmers. And so it was not surprising that within the collection, we found a huge variety of gathering and farming material. So we have farming seeds of various corns, beans, squash. We have acorns, we have pinyon pines. We have a lot of quids. If you're not familiar with quids, they would roast agave and yucca. And like an artichoke, they would put the leaf in their mouth like you do today, and you would pull off the pulp to eat it. What they would do is just take a piece and throw it in their mouth and chew it like chewing gum, sometimes called prehistoric chewing gum. And they would spit out the fibrous remains that they had. And those are called quids. And we have something like 13,000 quids in the collection. So obviously it was a very popular form of food. And we have a variety of corn cobs. We have them in different colors. And what surprises a lot of people is when you're in the ruins here today and you go into some of the caves, you might see a corn cob, but it'll look like the Chinese corn that you get in the Chinese restaurants these days. But that's all that's left. And what you have in our collection is very large corn. Some of them are 12 inches long. So they have a variety of sizes. And we think part of the reason why they shrunk is that they did not understand crop rotation. So if this was your crop of corn, that was your dad's, your grandfather's, your great-grandfather's, and they didn't understand that it was sucking out all the nutrients, and the yields got smaller and the corn cobs got smaller over time. So this is actually a perfect example of some of the difficulties of farming and gathering that they had over time. We're now in the textile gallery of the Dike collection. We've dedicated this gallery solely to the weaving and fabric material that we collected. The mural back here is of a cotton field. Many people are surprised that they grew cotton up here in the Verde Valley, but that's very common. And the University of Arizona has taken some of our cotton seeds and they're analyzing it to see whether or not it's originated here in the Arizona area or did it come up from Mesoamerica. But the bottom line is they definitely grew cotton here. And there's a lot of cotton material and weaving that was done here. It was one of their major trade items of the Sinawa to other areas. So for them to get other trade items like decorated pottery, etc., materials like textiles were one of the things that they traded. One display case here has weaving material of yucca and agave. We have sandals, we have cordage, we have little baskets and trays, and even a little ring basket that we call it because it's small, but we don't know what it was used for, but it's kind of like what you'd find on your bureau today with, you would throw your rings in at the end of the day. The biggest collection we have is of cotton textiles. We have over 14,000 fragments of textiles made of cotton generally. The variety of weaves is just amazing. We've had Hopi and Zuni weavers come up here to look at it, to study it. They've given us information about some of the items that we had not known before, but still there are some techniques that they themselves cannot figure out how they were made. But we have a variety of colors, a variety of tools, and among the ones that are in this particular case today, and I have to rotate these every 5 to 6 months, is the maximum you can put out textiles. Even though we control the temperature, the humidity, the lighting, they're still fragile items. We have tools. We have battens. We have some of the raw cotton yarn here. We have spindles. We have batten finishing rods and needles. And when the Hopi and Zuni weavers come here, they look and say that's no different than the material and the tools they have today. So they're kind of amazed that here we have 700-year-old tools that are exactly the same as they use today.
Now we're here inside the Dyck Collection Center. This is our receiving room for all archaeological matter, which also houses our decontamination room. This is the decontamination room. So all matter that comes into the facility is immediately inventoried and then put inside this chest freezer. The reason why we freeze objects for a minimum of 2 days is to kill off any bacteria, critters, any kind of bugs and so forth. We don't want to bring pests into the museum and especially in the repository. And now we're here in our collection center. This is where all the lab work is done from our survey crews. Our survey crews go out into the field to different sites and regions in the Verde Valley approximately 2 to 3 times a week. We have dedicated volunteers where this is their second career, and this is where they inventory the material and archaeological matter and put it into our database. Now we're in our repository center. Our repository center is comprised of over 80,000 artifacts, textiles, and remnants from the Sinagua, also known as the Hisatsinom culture, and the peoples who were indigenous to the Verde Valley. Behind me is a row of oyas and vessels and ceramics. This is a datura pot. This is what they made like a tea, the datura seeds, and it was like a hallucinogenic tea. And it was found in one of the kivas locally. And to my right, we have cabinetry that houses the Dyck Cliff Dwelling Collection. This collection encompasses 50,000 archaeological artifacts and remnants from the Dyck Cliff Dwellings that were found on Paul Dyke's ranch in Rimrock, Arizona. Rimrock is approximately 10 miles north of this museum, and the Paul Dyke Foundation Research Institution of American Indian Culture so kindly gifted us this collection, and we're the stewards of it. In addition to our permanent collection, the Verde Valley Archaeology Center and Museum also houses other cultural institution and National Forest Service property and objects. There is a desperate need for storage and repository, and space is so limited for nonprofit organizations. We have the capacity to house items and objects here and keep them safe within our climate-controlled facility. We're fortunate to have Jeffrey King, who is our Director of Collections and Curation, as well as Catherine Turney, who is our head archaeologist, part of this organization. Their tireless effort is the reason why we have this repository, the lab, and the Decontamination Center.